Moving on, we now want to look at steps 61 all the way to step 70. And for this marker, which is the green marker that we are currently working on, instead of using the RGB color code, we want to use the hex color code. So that's what we are going to be using for the gradient. But first off, we want to use the linear gradient function and set the gradient direction to 180 degrees. So linear gradient. So the first value will be the gradient direction. In this case, we'll set it to 180 degrees. And the first color argument is going to be a hex color code. So like we learned before, when you want to use a hex color code, it has to begin with the hash sign. So we bring the hash sign like so, and then the first two values, or the first pair of values, which is for the red, in this case we use 5 5, and then the second pair will be 6 8, and then the third pair will be 0 D. Okay, now next up, let's work on adding the second color argument. So the second color argument we want to use will also be a hex code, and as we've already mentioned, using a hex code, it always has to start with a hash sign. Then the first pair will be 7 1, this one here, F5, so F5, and then 3E, F5 and 3E. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so finally we want to add the third color argument, and we are still using hex values, so we bring our hash once again. The first pair will be 1 1, the second will be 6 C, and the third will be 3 1. All right, so now we have this more realistic looking green marker, which is similar to what we have here. Okay, so next up we are going to work on the third marker, which is the blue one. Okay, but before that, even without the color stops, you might notice that the colors for the green marker transition at some point as the red marker. The first color is at the start 0%, the second in the middle 50%, and the last is at the end 100%. So these are the default color stops. Okay, the linear gradient function automatically calculates these values for you and places colors evenly alongside the gradient line by default. So by default, CSS adds these color stops automatically. So we can remove the one we did for the red marker, and nothing should change. We should still have the same gradient effect. Okay, so like I said, when we remove it, we still have the same gradient effect. Okay, so let's move on. If no gradient direction argument is provided for the linear gradient function, it arranges colors from top to bottom or along a 180 degree line by default. So we want to clean up the code by removing the gradient direction argument, because the default value is 180 degrees anyway, so we don't need to add it. All right. Okay, so nothing changes. All right, now you will apply a gradient to the blue marker. This time, we are not going to use the RGB like we used for the red marker. We're also not going to use the hex values like we did for the green marker, but instead we are going to use the HSL function. So first we want to change this background color property to just a background property. And then next up, what we want to do is to use the linear gradient function. So I'll clean this one here. We want to use our linear gradient function. And the first value we are going to give it is for the hue, so 186. For saturation, we want to give it 76%. And then for lightness, we want to give it a 16%. 16, not 15. Okay. So that's going to be our first color. So this has to be an HSL, like so. Okay. Now we don't see anything here yet because we need more than just one color to form a gradient. So we want to add the second color argument, which is going to be HSL. We need 223 for the hue, 90% saturation, and then 60% for lightness. And then for the final color argument, we want to still use HSL, 240 for the hue, 56% for the saturation, and then 42% for the lightness. Okay, so now we have this also looking like what we have in the final page. Okay, so now that the markers have the correct colors, it's time to build the marker sleeves. So the marker sleeves is these things you see here. Okay, so we want to build these things. So the way we're going to do that is we want to start with a red marker div, and we're going to create a new div element inside it. So we need our opening div tag and our closing div tag. And what we're going to do is we want to give it a class with the name sleeve. Okay, yeah, so that's what we want to do. Now here's where we end this video, and in the next one we will continue to look at how we will be able to build these sleeves that we have here. Okay, so see you in the next one.